For those who don't know me, my name is Bob Lee, and I'm delighted to be contributing to this panel discussion on how to start a new citizen advocacy program. I really hope that my comments will be useful to those who are interested in developing a successful citizen advocacy program in their community. And I look forward to the opportunity to respond to any questions you might have, either here or at some stage in the future. I was the first coordinator at the Sunshine Coast Citizen Advocacy Program and worked there from its inception in 1996 until my retirement in 2016. I've found over the years that there seem to be very few coordinators still around with the experience of starting a new program, and even fewer who continue to have that involvement in citizen advocacy after leaving the role. On reflection, I realised that being part of the beginning of a new program was both a wonderful opportunity and a serious responsibility. Those of us involved in the new program had been warned that inertia builds quickly and resists change. We were therefore determined to get it right from the outset. The new Citizen Advocacy Program Board had witnessed and had heard about the failures of programs which had sought to modify or improve on the citizen advocacy model. Justifications for these failures most often mentioned the difficulty in recruiting citizen advocacy in those particular communities. Sometimes the failure seemed to stem from an inability to recruit office staff who could simply do the job. In the end, though, I felt that what was missing, or what had been lost, was that fundamentally important belief that altruism is alive in our world, that citizen advocacy provides a welcome opportunity for citizens to connect with and respond to the needs of other citizens who are vulnerable and struggling to have the good things in life. I'll return to this point about believing in the idea of citizen advocacy repeatedly during this presentation to emphasise what I believe to be a major issue for this movement. In 1991, Eric Jones, who had worked for a time at the North Sydney Citizen Advocacy Office, was working on the Sunshine Coast and was surprised to find that there was no advocacy support of any kind available for people with disability. He took personal action by advertising, organising, and conducting a public meeting to discuss this situation and to promote the idea of establishing a citizen advocacy program in the local area. While there was general agreement about the need for advocacy, there were, of course, differences of opinion about how the advocacy should be done. Eric had the knowledge and the personal experience to argue his case, and unsurprisingly to those who know him, a knack for inspiring people to join him in his commitment to citizen advocacy. From that public meeting, a diverse steering committee was formed, comprised of local citizens who shared a singularly important attribute: an unshakable belief that members of the community they lived in would willingly step forward to be citizen advocates for isolated and vulnerable people. The group plunged into a process of learning all they could about citizen advocacy. They met every 2 weeks at each other's homes, shared meals, attended conferences and workshops, visited citizen advocacy programs in other states and internationally, and invited guests to visit the Sunshine Coast. Those guests included that great friend to citizen advocacy in Australia, Zaina Lutvia, who is with us here today, and the much loved and respected Adam AJ Hildebrand. The group was therefore well prepared when the opportunity came in 1996 for the Sunshine Coast Citizen Advocacy Program to be funded. I want to make a point here about the sharing of food. Those who met to discuss the development of a new citizen advocacy program could have used meeting rooms, could have had pizzas delivered, could have avoided meal times altogether. They visited each other's homes and shared home-cooked meals because they had a clear understanding of the impact of hospitality and how the sharing of food affected their cohesion as a group. They were not motivated by convenience or cost saving. They understood the power of sharing as a strategy. I will never forget the wisdom of the first chairperson, the remarkable Elizabeth Williams, who said simply, "You don't fight with someone when you're eating their food." In other words, agreement and cooperation are inevitable outcomes of sharing, whether you are consciously aware of it or not. The committed and well-informed steering committee for citizen advocacy on the Sunshine Coast caused something of a stir amongst government department staff, even before the program got off the ground. Bureaucrats had decided that they would offer funding which was conditional on several fundamental last-minute changes to the proposal submitted by the steering committee. Clearly, they were used to imposing their own priorities on groups which were petitioning the government for funding. Negotiations commenced, and to the great surprise of the bureaucrats, the committee made it clear that the original proposal had been carefully thought through, and if unacceptable changes were imposed, the offer of funding by the department would be rejected. I was later told that there was great concern felt by bureaucrats about having to explain to department heads and to the minister about why they had failed to fund the program, when so much expertise had been developed over many years of dedicated learning by the group. Negotiations continued, however, and the deep knowledge of and commitment to the citizen advocacy model by the Sunshine Coast Group resulted in agreement. As so often happens, those who are ignorant about and steadfastly opposed to citizen advocacy find themselves becoming supporters when they spend time learning about the careful and comprehensive thought behind the citizen advocacy concept. Thanks to the remarkable vision of Dr. Wolfensberger, objections to the model are easily countered by informed response. Despite the stance taken by the group, the department staff appreciated that they were dealing with people who understood that in the end, funders, government, corporate, or individual all want performance. They want value for money and good outcomes for the funding provided. Having good outcomes, the good things in life, for isolated and vulnerable people with disability is always a good basis for agreement. On reflection, the back and forth negotiations about funding proved to be an invaluable investment in the ongoing culture of the citizen advocacy program. There was always an awareness of the potential for goal displacement to occur, and here it was arising at the very beginning. The preparedness to reject funding and stay on the right path from the outset demonstrated to everybody that there was clarity of purpose within this group and a determination to be true to the model. When I started work at Citizen Advocacy, my early understanding of the Citizen Advocacy Coordinator role was mostly provided to me by Julie Dunn, then Julie Clark, the coordinator of Illawarra Citizen Advocacy in Wollongong. As she did with so many others, Julie was generous with information and experience and unstinting in providing insights, advice, and support to anyone who took on the role of doing the work of citizen advocacy. She knew that working as a coordinator is often a lonely task, isolated from colleagues who do the same work. I will always be thankful for the guidance and support that Julie gave me in my early days. I learned that the energy needed to do the work of citizen advocacy comes from that unshakable, unconditional belief that our communities are indeed filled with individuals who want vulnerable people to be protected from harm and not have lives filled with loneliness. People who will respond when they are told that there is someone who really needs them in their lives. I learned that the Citizen Advocacy Coordinator's role was essentially 24/7. That didn't mean always being at work, but it did mean that citizen advocates sometimes needed support quickly, and bad things rarely waited for the convenience of regular office hours. I never begrudged being called at home by an advocate who had been with their protege at the hospital for hours, or were about to support their protege in an interview at the police station, or just wanted to chat about what approach they could take to an ongoing worrying situation. It was a privilege to me to support such wonderful individual advocate action. I learnt that being opportunistic was an important trait for a coordinator. Every social interaction, every catch up with an old friend, every questioner who asks, "What do you do?" provides an invaluable opportunity for access to a new section of the community, an opportunity to talk with pride about the wonderful change that citizen advocates make in the lives of vulnerable people. I learnt that there was a certain amount of debate about how advocates should be recruited by citizen advocacy programs. Some believe that an efficient and effective approach to advocate protege matching was to have a waiting list of potential advocates to be matched with proteges as they were found by or referred to the program. Others felt strongly that seeking an advocate only came after a protege had been recruited to the program. An exhaustive assessment of protege needs had been made, and an individual advocate profile had been developed from that knowledge of protege needs. The Sunshine Coast program from the outset adopted the protege first approach, never maintained a waiting list or a bank of advocates, and considered that this approach resulted in good, strong citizen advocacy relationships. There was, however, a recognition that some citizens, when they heard about the work of the program, would step forward and offer to take on an advocate role. No one felt that taking such selfless action should result in exclusion from ever being recruited as a citizen advocate. They were given a clear understanding of the matching process, and they were welcomed as supporters of the program. Not surprisingly, those individuals often were early contacts for the coordinator when the time came to seek an advocate. Most often, they were helpful in the recruiting process. Sometimes they knew exactly the right person, and sometimes, only sometimes, they fitted the advocate profile and became citizen advocates. I learned that a citizen advocacy board comprised of some or even all citizen advocates provided a real safeguard for the program. There was never a need for repeated debate about the worth of citizen advocacy. There was never any suggestion that it might be better or easier to change to another model of advocacy. Board members' understanding of citizen advocacy deepened with every instance of their own advocate action. Every day, of witnessing the vulnerability caused by isolation. There was no talk about the difficulty of finding advocates to recruit. The very presence of advocates as board members gave us all the evidence we ever needed about the willingness of good people to step forward and be involved. I learned about the absolute necessity of engaging intellectually with the principles of citizen advocacy. There are many documents which offer guidance to those involved in citizen advocacy, but I found that for me, the greatest clarity about issues encountered during the course of doing the work came from going back to the source, thinking about what the principles had to say about the matter. I'm looking forward to hearing Mitchell Peters' presentation tomorrow. Mitchell's always thoughtful, rigorous, and detailed style will result in a presentation invaluable as a reference for those preparing to establish a new citizen advocacy program. In closing, I'd like to make some comments about the place of citizen advocacy in a community. Why does citizen advocacy, which talks about and uses such old-fashioned, enduring, and conservative notions like citizenship, offering a helping hand, being a good neighbour, protecting the vulnerable, also gets characterised as being something of a radical concept, even something of a dangerous concept? Well, of course, there are some people who are really wedded to the notion of empowerment and the ideas that communities need to be forced, need to be legislated into giving the good things in life to vulnerable people. There are those who feel passionately that the very idea of protecting people is patronising and disempowering. There are those who believe that the ever-widening professionalisation of the lives of people with disability is a good thing, and that all we need to do is leave it to the experts. Then there are others who fear that communities are dangerous places and the best way to protect vulnerable people is to isolate them. Ironically, the feature of citizen advocacy, which is most challenging to many people, is exactly what makes it so effective. Those who are most vulnerable often, usually, have the least capacity to seek out or ask for support. They might have few or no others who can seek help on their behalf. They are waiting to be found. Because citizen advocacy actively seeks out those who urgently need help and does not sit back waiting for the knock on the door that never comes, it sometimes reveals uncomfortable truths about just how effective a community really is in protecting its most vulnerable citizens. Finally, I want to say that I will always be grateful that I have had the opportunity in my life to have been involved in doing citizen advocacy. I have to say that I feel privileged to have met and to have as friends the truly remarkable people who are involved in citizen advocacy throughout the world. And lastly, I want to say that I will always be grateful for the wonderful vision and generosity of the man who gave us citizen advocacy, Dr. Wolfensberger.